All right, good morning. Welcome to the Breeding Herd Mortality Concurrent Session. We're going to start off this morning with 3 rapid-fire talks, kind of the old TED-style talks with 3 of our concurrent graduate students that are working on projects in the breeding herd or the sow pillar area. I'm going to go ahead and give you their short bios right now, and then we're just going to have them come up one right after the other. In order, we're going to have Dr. Elly Kirwa, Dr. Laura Solis, and then Tricia Veldhuizen, right in that order. After that, then we'll have our guest speaker, Dr. Laura, talk to us again. So, Dr. Elly Kirwa is a research assistant and PhD student at Iowa State University with the field epidemiology team. Dr. Solis is a graduate student in the VD-PAM department at Iowa State University, working under the guidance of Dr. Marcela Almeida. She's pursuing a master's degree. Tricia Veldhuizen is a second-year master's student in the animal breeding and genetics program at Iowa State University, working under Dr. Deckers. So we'll have Elly kick us off, and then Laura will follow, followed by Tricia. So Elly, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Rademacher, for the introduction. I'm going to present part of the preliminary findings from our study on the factors associated with gilt retention in one of Midwestern. Thank you. We're going to start off. Slides up, please. Thank you. As mentioned, our title will be Factors Associated with Gilt Retention in Breeding Herds Under One Production System, which was in the Midwest. We're going to have an outline of the presentation. Will be just a quick introduction, reminders of what we've had most of the time yesterday. We'll look at the methods of analysis, and then we'll look at a couple of results and conclusions. As mentioned, the talk yesterday was a pretty good introduction on how the importance of sow retention or gilt retention is a backbone of sow herd productivity and profitability. With more retained sows, more piglets gain, but also the consequences of early culling of most of the parity 1 sows, about 15 to 20% leaving after only parity 1. And so to stabilize the herd flow, we need a stronger parity structure, and that concentrates all the reproductive females. And therefore, we also acknowledge that sow retention is part of the sow lifetime productivity, which is a very complex trait with all these other factors, which is genetics, nutrition, environment, reproductivity, health, and management. And below it here is gilt development, which is a center stone. I borrowed this slide from Mark Burgess in 2009. And looking at gilt development itself, it's also impacted by all these other factors, genetics being part, nutrition, environment, and management in itself, which we'll look at how they all influence or are associated with gilt retention. And therefore, the objective of this study was to assess the factors associated with gilt retention in breeding herds under one production system. As mentioned, the outcomes of this study were 2 outcomes, parity 1 retention and parity 3. To get oriented with the data set, just an overview, we had about more than 100,000 gilts, all of them being PAC genetics. The data set comprised of gilt first service system with all the breeding information, breeding site, weight, and age at first service. It's also important to mention that weight was tape measured here, but not scaled. Current parity and gilt entry types. Additionally, we had removal system that contained all the removal reasons and dates of removal as well in the removal site. We also had health data, mainly PRRS, Myco, and Seneca Valley virus. And also farm structural information, including filtration types. To understand the flow in this system, from the multiplier, the gilts either bred in the GDU or bred in the sow farm. In our data set, we had about 70% of gilts bred in the GDU before entering the sow farm, and about 39% of gilts that arrive bred in the sow farm instead. And so the eligibility criteria was to include all the gilts bred in 2022. Anybody missing ages and weights, and then we created some caveats of cutoffs of age and weight. 25 to 47 weeks, less than 25 or more than 47 weeks was excluded in age, as well as less than 265 pounds or more than 480 pounds of weight at first service. Factors at GDU we modeled, including breeding season, age and weight at first service, health status, as well as the farm structures as mentioned. So looking at the methods, combining this data, received data from 4 different streams as mentioned, Gilt first service system, the removal system, and the health data set to form a master file. This master file, we ran statistical mixed logistic regression, accounting for all the confounders. This was done in R. As an univariate level, we had initially 8 variables. These were 4 management factors as mentioned, 3 disease status and 1 structural information, which is a filtration status. And all that model selection was done at type 1 error rate of 0.2 for model selection at the univariate level, and all the model fitness test was the goodness of fit and multi-cardinality was conducted. And the models that, or rather the variables that filled the criteria were all carried forward to multivariate analysis. We'll move into the results quick. Just an overview, descriptives of the distribution across the breeding sites. As mentioned, 70% of most of the animals were bred in the GDU with 19 farms, and sow farms 30% of that with 36 farms, a total of 55 farms in total. And descriptively, looking at the retention overall, and that this is without any modeling, this is just descriptive statistics, the retention rate dropped parity 1 at 95 and later on at parity 3 at 60%. This was not surprising because I found this benchmark report from Sarja and Jennifer Peterson. 2023, which is still the same result. We see that at parity 3, we still have that 60%. And so I found that this would be a similar reporting of the same with the system. We look at removal reasons as mentioned. Looking at sudden death, which Laura, we're going to speak more about in a few minutes, was one of the leading, apart from unspecified or unknown causes. So we still find that overall sudden death followed by lameness and poor body condition were top leading removal reasons, with 15% of animals removed from sudden death. If we split that down into parity, look at parity 1, we still have sudden death, parity 1 sows dying of sudden death, 23.5% being the major, followed by lameness and unspecified reasons as mentioned. And splitting further into parity 2 to compare that, we have sudden death as the second, followed by lameness as well. Still have the non-specified or unknown reasons as well leading at parity 2. Laura is going to break that down further after this talk and tell us more about sudden death. At the univariate level, most of the risk factors were significant at univariate analysis, now considered this is age at first service, weight, breed site, season as mentioned, health status, and farm structure. We look into multivariate model. And so the final model contained age at first service, which was significant at parity 1 and parity 3. The per status, and per status here, it's also important to mention that this is lifetime exposure status. So we estimated, or rather we determined if a gilt was exposed to an outbreak or a consistent negative as the definitions for this breeding system, as I'll explain in a few minutes. And so just keep in mind that this is the lifetime exposure status from breeding to parity 1 and breeding to parity 3. And then we have breed side was significant as well. Parity 1 and parity 3. Filtration type was also significant, but interestingly, weighted first service was only significant at parity 3 and not at parity 1. As mentioned, season was included as a confounder to adjust for variations in seasonality. So we're going to break down that in a quick looking at plots in each of the risk factors, starting with age at first service, parity 1. So we can see that from the plot, the y-axis is the retention rate percentage, and x-axis is the different categories of ages. We categorize at less than 29 weeks, 29 to 34 weeks, and more than 34 weeks. And we see that there's about 4%, or rather 5% reduction in retention rate in breeding older animals at parity 1. And contrasting that to parity 3, which we saw quite a significant drop, it's about 13% drop in retention rate in the breeding the older gilts as compared to less than 29 weeks. As mentioned, weighted first service was significant at parity 3 only. Looking at that, the x-axis is the categories of breeding, less than 297 pounds, 297 to 330, and more than 330 pounds. Not so much significant difference on the extremes, which is less than 297 and 330, but significant which is all significant different from the recommended. Per status, a lifetime per status, as mentioned, this system uses different classification apart from the ASV classification. So with no outbreak, we'll keep consistency of colors in the presentation. Green will be a no outbreak, meaning as a stable vaccinated herd with no wild type introduction during the period. Consistently endemic will be the purple, which is low prevalence after 15 weeks. Outbreak will be in the color red, looks red in there, which is epidemic presence of or an outbreak in itself, a new wild type. And so looking at parity 1 exposure, lifetime exposure status, and we looked at herds that had an outbreak, had a 2% reduction in retention rate as compared to herds that were consistently negative or there were no outbreak at all. This was not significantly different with consistently endemic herds as well. Contrasting that to parity 3, and we had a 12% reduction in retention rate in herds that experience an outbreak in once or twice or any time of their lifetime as compared to consistently endemic or no outbreak herds. Looking at the impact of the breeding site, and as mentioned, we had more animals bred in the GDU than in the sow farm, and at parity 1, we have about 3% reduction in retention rate, with GDU, breeding in the GDU being favorable at type 1 error rate of 0.05. But looking at parity 3, we had a significant drop, which is higher retention rate of gilts that were bred in the GDU compared to those that were bred in the sow farm, about 27% reduction. Finally, looking at filtration status, at parity 1, filtered farms had a 2% higher retention rate as compared to non-filtered farms, which was consistently the same at parity 3. We saw that 2% in filtered farms as compared to non-filtered farms. So key takeaways as aided first service was a significant contributor. Higher retention across parity 1 at 4% and parity 3 at 13.7%. Stable herds ensuring per stability, improved retention, both parities 1 and 3. And breeding gilts and GDU was associated with a 27 improvement in retention rate at parity 3. And therefore implications is managing age and weighted first service, ensuring per stability, key sustaining per gilt retention in general. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, almost. Maybe the next one. Tricia, you can go. All right. Sorry for those technical issues. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to share some findings from our necropsy project. So this presentation has the title of Seasonality and Sudden Death, What do Necropsies Reveal About Sow Mortality? So here's our outline for today. First, I will put in context sow mortality, then background of the survivability project, some study goals and approach, then what do necropsies reveal about causes of death, some pictures, and finally takeaways. Let's start with these two graphs from Meta Farms. The one on the top is showing that in 2023 has the highest mortality rate on record, reaching nearly 16%. And on the second one, it's providing us more information about 25% of sow removal is classified as unknown or other. More key points about sow removal in general. Most of the sows in the US herds don't break even on around parity 3 to 4. And with the highest replacement rate at 65%, any death or early removal can have a big economic impact. So the survivability project began in 2019 and runs through 2026. It's a national effort to improve pig livability across all production phases, but today I will focus on Pillar 1, reducing sow mortality, by understanding why these animals are dying. So this project started with daily intervention protocols that the goal is to identify sows at risk before they become compromised. And with consistent training, the farm experienced a reduction of sow mortality of 4.5%. But today in this study, we are focused specifically on sudden, unexpected death, cases that appear normal before dying. And at the end, the goal is to identify patterns by understanding why these animals are dying and when during the production cycle, and using systematic necropsies protocol, data collected on farm, and the support of the diagnostic laboratory. So from September 2024 to September 2025, we are working with 2 commercial sow farms in the Midwest US, and at the moment we have completed 231 necropsies. But for this presentation, we will focus on one farm, the one with the most complete data set, which includes 186 necropsies. From each case, we collect data such as production stage, parity, body condition score, gestation length, stillborn history, and growth findings. So, but before moving to the necropsy results, I wanted to show you some graphs from the farm. So sow removal peaks on fall and summer, likely due to heat stress or management pressure, while in winter, remains more stable. Now in this chart, it's showing us how the deaths were classified on the farm. As we can see, nearly half of the deaths were labeled as unknown or other. So here is our first plot that is breaking down the overall death causes from the 186 necropsies. As we can see that gastric disorder was the main cause with 34%, followed by retained piglets, 24%, and other causes such as cardiovascular failure, intestinal disorders, and septicemia, each accounted for less than 10%. Now in this plot is showing the sow mortality by parity, and Gilt, P1s, and P2 accounting of 60% of the deaths. In this graph is showing us a weekly view of sow mortality across the 20-week sow production cycle, highlighting gestation and the peripartum period. During gestation, we have 30% of the deaths, and we have identified some peaks of mortality. The first one is at mid-gestation, around 50 to 70 days, and then the second one is at late gestation, 90 to 109 days. After the animals enter to the peripartum period, we start notice, well, we have a 60% of all deaths during this period, and we start noticing a sharp increase on mortality on week 17 that corresponds 119 days just after farrowing. Now in this plot is showing seasonality. the seasonal distribution of the causes of death, and gastric disorders and retained piglets were the more frequent, but also we can notice other causes such as intestinal and splenic disorders appear across the year. So here, going deeper into the two main causes of death, we have this plot, and we can see that retained piglets were more frequent during the transitional seasons, like fall and spring, and while gastric disorders has spike sharply during the summer months. So here we have a plot that it's combining seasonality and parity, and we can see that gastric disorders were concentrated on gilts, on younger animals, gilts, P1s, and P2 during the summer months, while on the other hand, retained piglets were more frequent on P1s and P2s, and in older sows, P5 plus, during the transitional seasons. So looking closely to the gastric ulcers, we have this plot. So out of the 186 necropsies, 86% of the animals had any grade of stomach ulcer, and the most common was grade 3 or severe. So as I mentioned before, 34% of the animals die by gastric disorders, such as perforations, gastric torsions, or acute ulcers, like a primary cause. But the rest of the animals, 122 animals, die by another different reason, but 69% of those present any grade of ulceration on the stomach, like a secondary finding. Now I would like to show you some pictures. So this one is from a case from a win sow parity 14. She doesn't have a history of treatments before die, and she appeared pale externally. And on the necropsy, we found the rotation of the stomach at cardia, and also the spleen is enlarged and engorged, showing vascular compromise, and also some clotted blood within the splenic vessels. And I really like this picture because it clearly illustrates how the rotation of the stomach disrupted the blood flow, leading to the splenic congestion and the hemorrhage. Here we have more pictures about stomach ulcers. On the left, we have an acute ulcer, and here on the right, it's a perforated stomach ulcer. Here in the center, we can see the ulcerations, cranial to the pars esophageal. Here is a common place to find the perforations. More lesions or secondary findings from the gastric disorders. We also can find melena in the intestines. Also, some other organs can appear pale, suggesting anemia, and in case that the sow is pregnant, also can affect the fetuses, leading to poor development or stillborns. So moving on to the second main causes of death, retained piglets, we have this plot that is showing the number of piglets that remains on the uterus on the necropsy, the stillborn history, and the parity. And we can see that parity 1 has the highest number of piglets remains on the uterus with the widest variability. In contrast, older animals, P5 plus, had fewer animals found on the necropsy. But there are some exceptions, like this case. This is a parity 5 that we found on the necropsy 17 piglets in the uterus. So here are the pictures from that case. So this is the parity 5. She died one day after she farrowed 3 stillborns, and we found on the necropsy this uterus full of 17 piglets. But just to emphasize that also there were 3 piglets obstructing the cervical canal. Just to wrap up, first we have that systematic necropsies can help us to identify the real causes of the unknown cases. Second, the peripartum period is the most vulnerable time for the survival of the sows. 65% of the deaths occur during this period, specifically during the first 7 days postpartum. Next one, gastric ulcers were common. So 86% of the cases had any grade stomach ulcers. And also we noticed more in younger animals such as gilts, P1s, and P2 during the summer months. Next one, retained piglets were frequent in parity 1 and 2 and in older sows during the transitional seasons. And finally, altogether, necropsies can help us to improve performance in the sows and longevity. So I just wanted to thank you to my mentors for all their support and advice, Iowa Select Farm, my colleagues, BDL team, field services team, thank you very much. And thank you all for your attention.
Good morning, everybody. I think we'll get the slide switched, and then I will get started. I do not have any jokes. Perfect. All right, everybody. Like previously mentioned, I am Tricia, and today I'm going to be discussing perineal score and other risk factors associated with prolapse in late gestation sows. So as most of us know, sow mortality has been on the increase, and from a study from Jason Ross through the Iowa Pork Industry Center in 2019, they found the top 3 reasons of unknown, lame or injured, and pelvic organ prolapse, and these have stayed consistent in recent years as well as top reasons for mortality. This brings concerns not only to the increase of pelvic organ prolapse, to the proportion of sow mortality, but also to production efficiency and animal welfare. So a little bit more about pelvic organ prolapse. For a purebred population, it was estimated to be heritable at 35%. And then also in that same survey done by Jason Ross, non-genetic factors were found to be water treatment, body condition, perineal score, and other housing systems to be associated with prolapse. So my objectives of the study were to estimate body condition, caliper score, and perineal score, and how they are associated with susceptibility to prolapse in commercial sows, and also to look into the Prop 12 effect on susceptibility to prolapse. So a little bit about my data. I had almost 4,000 sows ranging from parity 1 to 9 on 2 Midwest commercial farms. As sows were transferred from gestation into farrowing, I collected body condition, caliper, perineal score, and also prolapse incidences. And on this caliper here, it's hard to see, but the numbers on top for each dash is what was recorded for caliper. And then also I just want to break down the different housing systems that were within the 2 farms. So farm 1, they were in stalls and weaned into the stalls for breeding, and 35 days post-breeding, then they were moved into groups of 12 sows per pen. For farm 2, non-Prop 12, sows were weaned into those same stalls from farrowing, and then at 35 days post-breeding moved into groups of 36 sows per pen. And then for our Prop 12 animals, they were weaned directly into groups of 34 sows per pen. So just looking at an overview of the data distribution here, we see the number of sows within each farm by parity group, and then for farm 2 specifically, broken down between which ones were in Prop 12 and which ones were non-Prop 12. So perineal score was developed by Jason Ross and Zoe Kiefer through the PERS Pig Livability Grant, and you might have seen that at the last conference. But just a reminder here of a score 1, 2, and 3, 1 being little to no risk and 3 being at a high risk. So looking at this perineal score distribution for my data, broken out between those 3 different groups within the farm, farm 1, farm 2 non-Prop 12, and farm 2 Prop 12. We see here that between farms, for farm 2, between non-Prop 12 and Prop 12 production, that our Prop 12 animals have a higher percentage within that group, falling into that high category. And here high is a grouping of moderate and high perineal scores. And then looking at the prolapse distribution, we see a very similar same effect as perineal score. So specifically for farm 2, our Prop 12 animals are seeing a higher percentage rate within that group, falling into a prolapse versus not seeing a prolapse. So here, looking at parity effect on perineal score, we see that parities 2 and higher range between a 2.6 to 3.4 times higher odd to see a high perineal score. And we see that same effect for prolapse as well. So parities 2 and higher are at higher odds of having a prolapse. Moving into Prop 12 on the effect with perineal score. So here within that red box, the top 2 dots represent the non-Prop 12 animals over the 2 months of data collection, and the bottom 2 representing the Prop 12 animals over those same 2 months. And here we see that our Prop 12 animals are at an increased risk for a moderate to high perineal score. And we also see that same effect for prolapse as well, that our Prop 12 animals are seeing a higher risk for prolapse incidence. And I just want to highlight here the average body condition and caliper between those 2 groups. So for our non-Prop 12s, they had an average body condition of 3.4 and caliper of 16.9, but our Prop 12 animals actually came in with a higher average for both of those at 3.5 and 17.4. So looking at body condition on perineal score, here we group them into thin, ideal, and fat. So our average overall body condition was a 3.5, and our sows falling into that thin category of a 2 or a 1, we see a higher risk for a high, moderate to high perineal score. And caliper validates body condition as well here. So this one was classified as a covariate in this model. So the average overall caliper was 17.2. And for every 1 unit increase of caliper, we see a 10 to 17 reduction for incidence of prolapse, or of incidence of a high perineal score. And even when adjusting for body condition and caliper in these models, we still see that Prop 12 effect, that our Prop 12 animals are at a higher risk for a moderate to high perineal score. So just some conclusions from this. Parity 1 sows had significantly lower risk to moderate to high perineal score, as well as prolapse. Maintaining body condition 3 within late gestation is key, so our animals are coming in an ideal condition. And then also sows within Prop 12 production for this data had significantly higher risk to high perineal scores and prolapse. So my future work with this is I'll be estimating genetic parameters for prolapse, perineal score, and my other traits, and also identify genomic regions associated with perineal score and prolapse, and I would like to give acknowledgments to my collaborators on this project.